Young black man is humiliated by a police officer. Little does he know that he will be his boss. The sky over the small town of Jackson was turning heavy and gray as the afternoon wore on. The streets were nearly deserted, as if the impending storm had warned people to stay indoors. For many, it was just another ordinary day, uneventful. But for Alan O'Brien, a young 25-year-old police officer, his shift at the station was about to take an unexpected turn. Alan had been on the force for 3 years, during which time his dedication to the job had been tinged with a certain youthful arrogance. He had grown up in a middle-class home in the suburbs, where racial tensions were a daily whisper, barely noticeable but ever-present. Alan carried about him an air of self-satisfaction, a product of his youth and early success on the force. He was a tall man with short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that could intimidate anyone who didn't know his softer side. But there was a shadow in his mind, a quiet doubt that sometimes led him to act with unnecessary harshness. That afternoon, that shadow guided him to the city's south side, a neighborhood known for its predominantly African-American population. There, he spotted a young man walking calmly. Matthew was a robust, even-tempered 33-year-old man. His dark skin shone in the humid reflection of the air, and his face was marked by a mixture of pride and humility, as if each step were a reminder of the battles he had overcome. Matthew had been raised in a Catholic church, with the principles of faith and justice that his devout mother had taught him since he was a child. To him, a man's dignity was not defined by the color of his skin, but by how he faced adversity. Mateus walked toward his destination, wearing a dark suit that accentuated his elegance. When he noticed a police car slowly approaching, he turned his head, in a gesture that mixed curiosity and caution. Behind the wheel, Alan watched the man with calculating eyes. For him, seeing a well-dressed black man walking in a neighborhood like that was reason enough to investigate. "Hey you, where do you think you're going?" Alan shouted as he approached. Matthew stopped, surprised by the aggressive tone. He remained calm, aware that any wrong move could be interpreted in the worst way. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm going to a meeting," he replied politely, although a slight glint of annoyance crossed his eyes. Alan got out of the car, his boots echoing on the damp pavement. He looked Matthew up and down, studying his suit, his watch, his face, as if searching for some sign of guilt. "A meeting, huh? And what kind of meeting would that be? You don't look like you're from around here." Matthew took a deep breath, controlling the anger that was beginning to bubble inside him. It wasn't the first time he'd been stopped for no reason, but there was something different in the air, a sense that things could quickly get worse. "It's a business meeting, officer. I don't think it's necessary to stop me for that." Alan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Business, of course. I know how it is. Show me an ID, and quickly." Matthew nodded slowly, taking out his wallet with deliberately careful movements, trying not to give Alan any reason to act against him. He handed over his ID, watching as Alan examined the document disdainfully. Before Matthew could respond, a voice on Alan's radio interrupted the tense moment. It was an urgent call from the police station. All officers were to return immediately, as something important was about to happen. Alan dismissively tossed the ID back to Matthew. "Get out of here before I change my mind," Alan said, heading back to the car. Matthew picked up his ID from the floor, keeping his expression impassive, although inside he felt the burn of humiliation. Instead of arguing back, he turned and continued on his way, knowing that the true moment of justice would come. The next morning, the station was filled with palpable nervousness. Rumors were circulating among the officers that something big was about to happen. Alan arrived and noticed the furtive glances of his colleagues. Some were murmuring almost inaudibly, and Captain Robert, a middle-aged man with a gray beard and a deep voice, had been more reserved than usual these days. Now the reason for his behavior was about to be revealed. "Attention, officers. Gather in the conference room," Captain Robert ordered, without raising his voice, but with a tone that left no room for discussion. Alan followed his colleagues into the office, feeling a slight tingling in the back of his neck. He wondered what had prompted the urgent call last night and the tense atmosphere this morning. He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, except, perhaps, the encounter with the black man on the south side of town. But that was nothing new. Cops had these kinds of encounters all the time, especially in a city like Jackson. When everyone was gathered, the captain cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "I want everyone to know that today we will be getting a new chief of police," he announced, letting the news slowly sink into everyone's minds. Alan felt the tension rising. A new boss meant change. For some, that was unwelcome. He, in particular, was apprehensive. His position was solid, but a new boss could disrupt that stability. Finally, the door to the office opened, and the new police chief walked in. The murmurs stopped immediately. All eyes turned to the figure approaching with firm steps. To Alan's surprise, it was Chris Mateus, the same man he had confronted and humiliated the previous afternoon. Mateus was dressed in the same impeccable dark suit, and his serene expression denoted confidence. Alan's expression quickly changed from confusion to disbelief, then to a mixture of fear and embarrassment. Matthew walked to the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over each of the officers who were watching him with surprise and respect. When his eyes met Alan's, he maintained his composure, but a slight smile formed on his lips. "Good morning, gentlemen," Mateus began, with a firm voice. "I am Chris Mateus, and as of today, I will be the new chief of police. I know that some of you already know me, and I hope that, with time, we can all get to know each other better." The tension in the room was almost palpable, as if the air could be cut with a knife. Alan stood completely still, trying to process what was happening. His mind was spinning, replaying every detail of the previous day's encounter. He felt trapped, unsure of how to get out of this situation. Matthew continued speaking, laying out his vision for the police force and his plans to improve community relations. As he spoke, he didn't miss the expression on Alan's face, a man who now understood the weight of his actions. But Matthew was not a vengeful man. His mother had always taught him that true strength lay in compassion and the ability to forgive. And for those who are wondering, yes, I have lived in Jackson for many years. I know this city well, its problems, and I believe in the solutions we can implement together. I am here to work with you, not against you," Matthew concluded, pausing to let his words sink in. "But I also want you to know that I will not tolerate any form of discrimination or abuse of power. This is a new beginning for all of us." Matthew gave Alan one last look, not with resentment, but with something much more powerful, an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to grow, and to redeem himself. He didn't say anything directly to Alan, because it wasn't necessary. What Alan felt in that moment went far deeper than any words of rebuke. As the police officers began to file out of the room one by one, muttering to themselves, Alan sat there, unable to move. His mind kept replaying the previous day's encounter like a broken record. He had never felt such a heavy burden on his conscience. Captain Robert approached him and placed his hand on his shoulder. It was a friendly gesture, but also a warning one. "You better talk to him, Alan," he said calmly. "This is your moment to show him what kind of man you are." Alan nodded slowly, knowing the captain was right. He struggled to his feet and left the room. The hallway was nearly empty, but in the distance he saw Matthew walking toward his new office. Alan knew he could no longer delay the inevitable. "Mr. Matthew," he called, and his voice sounded strangely weak. Matthew stopped and slowly turned to Alan. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Their eyes met again, but this time there was no barrier of authority between them. Just two men, one struggling to find the right words and the other willing to listen. "I want to apologize for yesterday," Alan said, his voice full of sincerity. "I had no idea who you were, and I behaved in an unforgivable way. I'm embarrassed." Matthew looked at him, letting Alan's words sink in. "I don't care who I was yesterday, Alan. What matters to me is who you are today," Matthew replied, his tone gentle but firm. "We all make mistakes, but what matters is how we deal with them. I'm willing to let that go, but I need to know if you are too." Alan nodded, feeling a great weight lifted from his shoulders. "Yes, sir, I am." Matthew held out his hand, and Alan shook it firmly, feeling the strength and warmth in the gesture. In that moment, Alan knew that his life and career were about to change forever. He had learned a lesson that would shape not only his future in the police force, but also his role in society, as a man capable of owning his mistakes and growing from them. And so we learn that true strength lies not in the power we wield, but in the humility with which we accept our failures and the willingness to change for the better. At the end of the day, we all have the capacity to be something greater than our past mistakes.